Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the St. Louis Zoo. I'm Louise Bradshaw. I'm the Director of Education here at the Zoo, and it's indeed my pleasure to welcome you tonight. Those of you who are frequent Academy of Science lecture, science seminar, and conservation conversation participants probably recognize that things are a little different tonight. As you drove up, you thought, oh my gosh, I can't find parking. We are hosting Citigroup for their annual holiday party. So I just want to make sure everybody who's in here knows that they're here for a lecture on CyberForensics, and this is what they're intending to hear, and it's not going to have, I don't think we have any elves or Santas or Rudolphs or anything holiday themed in this presentation, just to make sure everybody's aware. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague Rose Jansen from the Academy of Science St. Louis, who will tell you a little bit more about upcoming events and also introduce our speakers tonight. Thank you.
Well, good evening. My name is Rose Jansen, as Louise said, and we're very pleased to be partnering with the St. Louis Zoo to bring you the Science Seminar Series Talks. For those of you who are not familiar with the Academy of Science, I'm going to take just a moment to tell you a little bit about who we are. We're an independent science organization. We're supported entirely through community contributions, and we have been connecting science and the public since 1856, so for a very, very long time. And we have a long-standing mission to advance the public understanding of science and inspire the next generation of scientists and science advocates. We continue to celebrate more than 150 years of community service by offering a very broad range of free and low-cost public science programming, collaborative seminar series, and trips and tours that highlight science at venues throughout the region. And you can find more information on the Academy and our community-wide events, public talks, and programs by visiting our website at academyofsciencestl.org. You can also visit us on Facebook or Twitter, or pick up some of our literature that is at the visitor's desk just outside the auditorium. If you're interested in helping to support the Academy's many science opportunities for children and adults throughout the region, there are some membership brochures also out at the visitor's desk, or come see me after tonight's talk. I'd be happy to talk with you about becoming a member of the Academy. If you'd like to receive e-notification of upcoming Academy and St. Louis Zoo public lectures and events, there will be some e-news sign-up sheets that will make their way around the audience this evening, so feel free to jot down your email address and we'll make certain that you receive notice of upcoming public science offerings of the Academy and the St. Louis Zoo. If you're a student and you need to verify your attendance, please come see me after the Q&A. We do have a few copies of Dr. Marcella, and I'm not certain I'm going to get this name correct. Is it Frederic Guillossou? Oh my gosh. Guillossou. Mr. Guillossou, his co-author. Is with Dr. Marcella tonight to talk about cyberforensics, from data to digital evidence. And like I said, we do have some copies of their book that will be available for purchase and signing by the author following tonight's talk. I do want to mention a couple upcoming events you might have an interest in attending. Tomorrow night, December 13, from 7 to 8:30 p.m. in the Missouri History Museum's Lee Auditorium, we have Clinical Professor of Applied Dental Medicine at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, Dr. Kurt Stutt. He'll be taking us on a cringeworthy look back at the history of dentistry with a peek at today's kinder, gentler dental technology. This talk is being presented in conjunction with the exhibition Discover the Real George Washington, New Views from Mount Vernon, which is on display at the History Museum through January 21st, 2013. So if you want the tooth, the whole tooth, and nothing but the tooth on the dental health and infamous wooden teeth of our country's quintessential founding father, mark your calendars for tomorrow night and join us for brushing up on history, dentistry through the ages. And then on Wednesday evening, February 6th, we have Academy Fellow and Deputy Principal Investigator of the Mars Exploration Rover Mission, Dr. Raymond Arvidsson. He'll be here in the Living World Auditorium at 7:30 to talk about exploring ancient Martian climates with the Opportunity and Curiosity rovers. Again, you can find more information on these and additional science opportunities on our website or in the literature we've left for you to take with you today before you leave. We are going to raffle off a copy of CyberForensics this evening, so I will come around the audience with some little index cards and some pencils, and if you want to jot your first and last names down, I'll collect all of those index cards in a bag, and we'll do a drawing again at the end of the talk tonight. So with all of that said, I'm going to introduce our speakers this evening. Dr. Marcella is currently a professor at Webster University in the George Herbert Walker School of Business and Technology's Management Department and is president of Business Automation Consultants, a global information technology and management consulting firm providing information technology management consulting and IT audit and security reviews and training for an international clientele. He is an internationally recognized public speaker, researcher, workshop, and seminar leader with 35 years of experience in IT audit, security, and addressing internal controls, and an author of numerous articles and 25 books on various IT audit and security-related subjects. His most recent book, CyberForensics, From Data to Digital Evidence, published by John Wiley & Sons, was released in May of 2012 and provides insights into how data are stored, processed, identified, analyzed, and eventually end up as evidential matter. All this leading to a more thorough and detailed understanding of which data are relevant, significant, and most critical in a cyber forensic investigation and why, which ultimately is the basis for and foundation of a comprehensive, well-executed cyber forensic investigation. And like I said, we will have a few copies available here tonight for purchase and signing by the authors, and we will be raffling off a copy of the book. Dr. Marcella's articles on cyber extortion, workplace violence, electronic stored information, privacy risks in multifunctional devices, cyber forensics, incident management planning, and ethics have appeared in a number of journals and magazines, and he has been recognized by the IA as a distinguished adjunct faculty member. And then Mr., I'm going to get the last name wrong, I'm so sorry, Guillossou, is an information security analyst with TALX, a division of Equifax. He regularly trains on intrusion prevention systems and has successfully led a number of forensic investigations in the field. So they are here with us tonight to talk about cyber forensics from data to digital evidence. Won't you please join me in welcoming tonight's speakers.
There. Well, good evening, everyone. Actually, we just told Rose we have 2 copies of the books we're going to raffle off tonight, so make sure you sign those little index cards that Rose brings around. My co-author Fred and I are going to take you on a quick journey because, as we talked with Rose earlier, how to synthesize an entire science down to an hour, and then also 3 years of writing this particular book into an hour as well. So a lot of material. We're going to kind of tag team between the material here. What we'll try to look at tonight very quickly, or at least within the next hour, and leave time for some questions and answers. How are data stored? The forensics process, just a kind of a quick overview, because it is quite detailed and lengthy, and we don't really want to bore you with all the detail. And then where data are, where do the data lurk? And that basically, as we say here, deletions is futile in the sense the data are there, and giving a sense of maybe be afraid the data are there, even though you destroy the disk or delete the data, they're still there. So how are data stored and retrieved from the standpoint of basically, as I said, the responsibility of the forensic investigator to accurately report on what's going on or what's happening within the hardware itself, to identify, extract, and analyze data, to be able to determine exactly which data are critical, which data are important, how to find the data, how to analyze, how to extract, and how to do all that in a way in which the eventual data that are turned over to management are going to be acceptable in a court of law. So basically, we're looking at the analysis process of how to find data relevant to an investigation. Okay. All right. So let's see if we can get this. Let's see. I'm not sure why. Well, we're going to go backward here. There we go. Maybe just to get us started is what a CSI investigation might be. Again, you can take a look at the investigations that have been around for quite a while, but it's retrieving information that are going to be germane to the investigation. So I guess probably even in Oz they had some CIS. But what this presentation is not, and let's kind of put this up right away, there's no way you're going to be able to solve the crime in an hour or before the commercial ends, or that you can search an Interpol database and get a hit as quickly as these folks in Hollywood can do it. It's just amazing. We wish we had their kind of tools, because it'd be a lot easier doing the job that we do if we could do it with the way the guys in Hollywood and women in Hollywood do it. But so it's not what you see on television. It's realistically, it's much more tedious and boring. There's certainly no cast parties, no signings. It's pretty boring just extracting the data. But there's an interesting discipline, if you will, as it says here, combining law enforcement, computer science, also the idea of legal systems, but basically to collect and analyze data from the computer systems. Networks, wireless, we'll talk a little bit about wireless communications tonight. Any way, any device that can store and hold electronic information, whether it be your mobile device, your multifunctional machine, i.e. your photocopier, anything that can hold data is potentially discoverable from an evidential matter perspective and forensics. Doing all this in such a way as the evidence will be eventually admissible in court. Because if you don't follow the right procedures, and again, some of the Hollywood is good about showing a procedural process, but if we don't follow the procedures, it may never have the evidence, although it might be used to potentially convict someone of some wrongdoing, may not be admissible in court. And that's the ultimate goal, is be able to take those evidence, should the law enforcement want to pursue a case, is to make sure those evidence data can be admissible in court. All right, forensic examiners, so for folks that out there are thinking, is this potentially a career field for me? Should I get involved in it? It's certainly, again, nothing like you see on television, but certainly a viable profession for any students that might be here looking at, that are enjoying computer science, math, law enforcement, maybe looking at law school eventually. It is a growing field, and the forensic examiner basically is the person responsible for, actually, as I said, is extracting the evidence once the equipment is seized, extracting the information, and then, as I kind of highlight here, making visible that evidential information. Think about a hard drive, think about your mobile device, think about, I don't say your microwave, but anything that can store data. There are millions and millions of bits of data there. Which are the most appropriate data that are actually going to be evidence? And how do I make those data visible? In a sense, how do I find those and present them to management? So how do we get this started? The kind of primordial soup, so to speak, the building blocks of data are the bits and bytes. All right? Nothing more than electrical impulses, if you will, coursing through some type of computer system. So the idea is, just because I say here, the pulses end up as data, I need to know how those pulses, the bits and bytes, how do they actually formulate themselves? How do they kind of coalesce? How do they coagulate, if you will? How do they become something usable versus just electronic bits and bytes, pulses of electricity coursing through some type of computer system? So, data, right, is the basis of the process. I've got to find the data. And then, as I said earlier, how those data actually become evidence. I need to know how that process starts. I can skip all this and I can get to the really fun stuff, the exciting stuff, but just knowing, if I don't know, it's like, any students that are here can probably, kind of have a sense of feeling in this. And you take a math exam and you get all the answers correct, but you don't pass the exam because why? What do you think? What's the one thing your teacher's going to probably tell you? You didn't show me the work, right? So you don't know how you got the answer or how the math is applied behind the answer. Same principle here, right? You need to know how those data are accumulated, how those data become evidence from those bits and bytes.
And if I can interrupt for a second.
Sure.
That becomes even more critical in the court of law if you're questioned about how you got that data, in your answer is, I just hit the checkbox on the tool that I was using and it provided me the answer. That may not cut it, especially if the prosecuting attorney smells blood and notices that there's a lack of understanding of how that information was obtained. They'll dig a little deeper and look for the weaknesses and the lack of understanding.
One of the big problems in this type of profession are a lot of people that can rush out and say, well, we can do forensics, and they're simply using software tools. There's plenty of tools out there that will analyze data. But again, as Fred said, if you don't know how you got the answer and how the tool works, simply saying I used a tool, turned the switch on, ran a piece of software, you could be jeopardizing not only your professional career, but also potentially the innocence or guilt potentially of someone who's being investigated. With that said, the computer's pretty good at crunching numbers and talking and giving us information, but it doesn't really talk in English-like terms that we understand. So digital data basically starts out its life in something called binary. And we're going to take a look at binary very quickly, build it up, and then see how we eventually get words on a page like we have in front of us. The binary system starts with a base 2, meaning there's only 2 options, basically. Right? You have 2 possible states or conditions, so it's pretty easy. And that's the basic way a computer will think and work, is at a base 2 level. Not something that's really easy for us to look at, but base 2 pretty much, it's either on or off. So electricity sometimes is a pretty good example. Lights are on, lights are off. And so a binary or base 2 type system.
And that's, in fact, the computer uses that because it's electrically based, so it's easy for a computer to simulate on and off, therefore 0 or 1, right? Versus a letter A computer wouldn't know. An electronic impulse can't represent a letter A or a letter B or a number 3.
So the whole idea is to take everything we know, every least known language in the human race right now, and be able to communicate that. If you want to use it through a computer, computers only understand 2 states of the world, on and off, 1s and 0s. So you have a rudimentary closed-end question, it's either yes or no. You don't want a lot of explanations, so you have a binary question. Our colleagues in the law and legal profession tend to have good use of binary in the sense they'll ask they don't tend to ask open-ended questions. They'll ask for a question that has either a response of yes or no when they're cross-examining someone. So a 0 as a single 0 or single 1 is what's called a bit. So the smallest level of the universe, at least from a computer perspective, the smallest unit of data recognized and processed by a computer is going to be a bit. So students are taking notes because there'll be a quiz later. All right, it's a bit, especially those guys already signed your papers. I'm going to ask you questions. I see you sitting out there. All right, so it's a bit. The smallest unit of measure in a computer is a bit. All right, we're going to grow from that. And so I can use that to represent on and off. I can use 1 to represent on or yes, and 0 to represent off or no. Now all of a sudden I'm starting to build a numbering system that's going to allow me and allow the computer to communicate with a human. So think about how effectively a carbon-based unit can communicate with a silicon-based unit if you don't have some type of way of communicating simply as a binary yes or no type environment. All right. As you connect consecutive 1s and 0s, you start to build more information. I can make larger and longer data. I can come up with more states of the world, all right? So if I only have 2 states of the world, if I add another bit, so to speak, I can come up to, being able to represent 4 different variations. So I add another bit now, and it says the number of possible, this is small. I've got big thumb here, and I get small. So basically, I can add additional bits. I can come up with more and double the number of values. So I can come up with like the state doubles from 0, 0, 0, 1, etc. Now, what can I represent? Well, now I can represent the seasons. With only 2 states, I could. There's no way I could represent the 4 seasons, but now, right, it's just easier to be able to represent more information where I am expanding and doubling the amount of bits I'm using. So the whole logic of growing technology and growing data increases. Beyond binary, what happens, how do I represent now alphabet from A to Z and numbers 1 through 10 or 0 through 9? If you think about it, how many unique characters might we need? Well, we need 36. So how many bits do you think we needed to represent 36? Quickly, the students out there are doing the math. We have, how many bits would we need for 36 unique identifiers? All right, well, I can move ahead here, right? 6, I heard someone say 6. Give that person 2 cards for the raffle. All right, we have 6 bits. All right, so you easily cover the needs, right? So 2 to the 6th power, if you do all the math out, it gives us 64 possible combinations to look at those 36 unique identifiers. And we look at the computer perspective now, how do we represent all the special characters and everything else that's out there? Well, 36 and 64, 6 bits will not be enough. So what do we do now? Well, go ahead, Fred, tell them about the ASCII.
Add an extra bit, right? Now you double your potential combinations of possible potential values for those. So with 7 bits, we have 128 characters. Now, or possibility for unique characters. Now we tie in the ASCII table, which is what computers use which is the American Standard Code for Information Interchange. And that's I guess the kind of the chart that, I call it a chart, that the computers in the United States use to represent our character-based system, the English language. Obviously in China and in India and other countries, ASCII may not necessarily be very useful for them, and they have their own systems, but here we use ASCII.
That gives us enough at 128 unique characters, or allows for that unique character set. And we're talking about if you add 1 more bit, what you have is an 8-bit character set, which is now pretty much what we use. There's 256 items. So you think about 256 items, gives us enough flexibility to encode most of the characters we need in English language. Now, if you go to a character set like Fred's saying, maybe Arabic, if you want to represent an Arabic character, well, you're going to need additional character sets and additional information. But we're going to keep it to English right now. Here's an example for quick representation, if you will. You have the character on the far left-hand column. Here's what the ASCII character representation would be, and here's its binary representation. So we're going to build on this, not that you have to memorize it, but the idea is that we're going to build, now we're going from binary up to somewhere. We eventually want to be able to get to a character or text type of data. Here's the language characters we want. For example, I would use this pointer, but until it skips around a bit. So for example, careful where I walk here, for the character H, the ASCII characters is the numeric value 72, the binary value then represented here. So I can now represent all the at least Latin-based characters, alphabet, and special characters now in a ASCII character set. However, it's still difficult to look at 1s and 0s. It's pretty difficult, so there's got to be a more efficient way to do this. So we go from binary to decimal, all right? So now we're looking at decimal math, which most of us are pretty familiar with. All right, so ASCII characters are assigned a decimal value, and they become, binary cannot be directly converted ASCII, so we got to do some kind of manipulation in the middle. How do I get from binary to decimal? And to be able to convert that to something that a human can understand as part of the forensic investigation. Since we're, as I say here, microprocessors doing mathematical calculations, basically that's where the process takes place, all right? The microprocessor is going to do the calculation or the conversion for us and be able to go from binary then to digital. So how do we do that? Here's the binary value on the far left-hand side, the decimal equivalent, there's the ASCII symbol, and then the description. So if you want, for example, the ASCII symbol for 6, the decimal equivalent of a 6 is actually 54. Well, that's because that's the binary value of 6. That's the 1s and 0s in that far left-hand column. Now this is where you think about it, well, where's the cast party, or where's the, the helicopter you're jumping out to do the investigation, or where's all the, the makeup people? It's just 1s and 0s, folks. There's not a lot of flash there. It's not, it's exciting, but the idea is we're drilling down. We're actually going to be able to look at a hard drive that contains nothing but binary 1s and 0s, bits and bytes, on and off impulses, and be able to tell you what exactly those 1s and 0s will mean when we finally do the evaluation. So how do you go from bits to byte? Well, 8 bits equals 1 byte, all right? And that becomes real critically important from a math perspective and also from a forensics perspective. So bytes are mathematically translated into representative decimal equivalents that we can understand. So you can see you've got the, at the bottom there, the decimal values of 8 bits. So if I look at 2 to the second power, decimal equivalent is 4. If I look at 2 to the 7th power, decimal equivalent is 128. So, big question, how do I convert binary to decimal? Because binary is going to be real difficult. All right, the key here is that anytime I see a value that has a 1, that means the switch is on, or it's a 1. Or if the value has a 0 in respective field, it's off. So something like here, if you take a look at that very bottom row, a 0, that means that value is off, 0, 0, 0. Well, now all of a sudden have a 1. Well, that value is on. So what is that value? That's 2 to the 3rd, which is 8. All right, so now I have 8, I have 16, I have another value turned off, and now I have 64. So all I have to do is add up those values, those bits that have been turned on, and I add up 64, 16, and 8, and what does that give me? Gives me the value, gives me that decimal equivalent of that binary value, right? So
you can also use a scientific calculator and plug in either the binary. If you ever go just on your home computer, you go to calculator and then view scientific. And you can do the conversion there as well from binary to decimal.
But students, when you're doing your math homework, you got to do it the long way. You just can't look at the calculator, all right? But Fred's right. All computers have that scientific calculator built in. You can simply go in and
you can check our work.
You can put in the ones and zeros, and hit decimal. It'll come up with the 88. Here's another little example of how you would do it. You just simply bring down the values. So we pretty much put this little document together when we were writing the textbook, making it easy for people to see. If I just bring down my values, anything that's turned on, I'll carry the value down. If it has a 0, I bypass it. So I just total up the decimal equivalents of each binary value, whether it's a 1 or 0, and then I can total up and I get my binary equivalent of 88. So the computer will recognize all that 1s and 0s, that string of 1s and 0s, which is meaningless to us, but we can recognize that pattern of 1s and 0s to be something now more humanly recognizable as the value of 88. So think about it. If you were looking for the value of 88 sitting in someone's hard drive, you wouldn't be able to use 88 because the computer wouldn't understand what an 88 is. The only thing the computers are going to understand are the decimal or the binary equivalent. So you'd have to be able to reverse the process. Say, okay, I have to make the value 88, turn it into a binary value, and search for that string of characters so that I can find 88 sitting in a computer somewhere. And then we'll give you an example in a minute. So here's our little case example. All right, Ronell is a forensic investigator. She's looking to see if Jose has potentially shared confidential proprietary company information with a competitor, Janus. And in order to determine that, I'm going to search Jose's hard drive. We seize the drive. I'm going to search the drive and see if I can find any indication of any kind of communication with Janus's company, the XYZ company. Right, so from a forensic investigation perspective, we're going to try, the evidence would be maybe that Jose has gone to the website, or maybe there's an email exchange, there's a URL. Since it's a competitor, it certainly might be legitimate, and we exchange non-confidential information, but we want to dig a little bit deeper to see if there's something a little bit less than legitimate going on between Jose, potentially selling company secrets, etc. Well, the question is then what? All right, I'll let Fred, how we put this case together? Ronell's got to do what?
Well, he's going to search the drive for XYZ, right? So he's going to find the decimal equivalent of those characters, X, Y, and Z, and then eventually convert that to binary and then look for those binary structures strung together on the hard drive.
Yeah, there's no way we're going to find the value X, Y, and Z just sitting on a drive somewhere in English-like characters of text. It only exists in binary value. So Ronell is going to have to use an appropriate tool to convert that X, Y, Z to binary and look at the drive for the character equivalent of X, Y, and Z. So here might be where she would first start. She needs to find out, for example, and I've boxed it there, the decimal value of X, Y, and Z. And it's kind of nice we picked X, Y, Z as the example company because it all fits together on the same page on the end of the alphabet. If we'd picked some other characters, we'd have to have 4 or 5 different screens. But X, Y, and Z, here's the ASCII symbol, which is the, I guess, English-like character that we understand. Uppercase X, Y, and uppercase Z is the description, and the decimal equivalent. So you'd say the decimal equivalent would be 50 or 88, 89, and 90. 88 is equivalent to an X. That's the decimal equivalent that we're going to have to look for and turn that into binary so we can actually find that value on the hard drive.
And recall, these binary values are defined by the ASCII table. So the computer, that's just built into the system, so the computer knows 88 is equal to an X, right? So it's not something that the computer necessarily has to figure out. It's programmed into the computer. The computer just refers to the ASCII table.
So all we have to now do is, as this slide shows, take that ASCII value and convert it down into its decimal or its binary equivalent. So 88 decimal to binary, and I've highlighted there what the binary equivalency would be. And so it looks like this. If you were to look in a memory and look for the equivalent of X, Y, and Z, it would look like this string of characters sitting somewhere in memory. So think about, I don't know, your watch probably has, your camera has at least a couple 100,000 megabyte of storage in it, and maybe your watch does, or think about all the bits and bytes on your PC sitting at home, or your laptop, or maybe even your iPad. How would you be able to find that unique character string in order to find out any equivalence to the company X, Y, and Z? It's almost impossible. You're going to look at the machine's going to be able to tell you, well, I can look at X, ones, and zeros, but now I have to be able to come up with a way of reading that binary value. Extremely difficult for humans to decipher binary, especially when you're looking through hundreds and thousands of ones and zeros together. All right? We're going to use specific tools to convert the binary code to a format more understood by humans. So now we're going to the next level of the evolution process. We started out at bits, the base bottom part, the bottom rung of the evolution cycle, so to speak, and now we've gone up to binary to decimal, and we're looking at hex. So hex is going to be able to give us a human-friendly version of the binary value. Hex is a base 16. All right, this is all relevant because this is what the forensic examiner is going to be looking for and the tools that they're going to be using. So that hex 16 allows us to represent all the alpha characters in 0 and 9. All right, so there's a unique character set. 4 bits make up the pattern. So we're looking at the hex, binary, and decimal equivalency. So if you want the decimal equivalent of, for example, 9, you've got the binary in the middle. If you want the equivalent of 12, all right, you've got the binary equivalent and the hex representation.
Now, typically, there'll be 2 hex characters combined, which will equal 1 byte. 1 hex character is equal to 4 bytes, and as we know, jumping ahead.
Here, no.
No, go ahead, go for it.
We got here, we got nibbles, we got bits and bytes and nibbles, and so, even there's some fun in forensics, we've got nibbles, and you gotta be real careful how you talk about nibbles in a mixed group, but we have nibbles, and so we have a byte, and I'm gonna use that as our representation. We'll see this in a little bit, but not a byte from now. It's 2 halves called nibbles. The single hex characters corresponds to 1 nibble's worth of data, or 4 bits. All right, and this gets a little bit challenging, but so 2 nibbles will be paired together to accomplish representation. We have 4 bits, all right, so we have 4 bits then equals 1 nibble, 2 nibbles equals 1 byte, and then 8 bits equals 1 byte. So you can see how that kind of works together, right? We have nibbles together into bytes, we have bytes, bits representing bytes. And then
since each hex character represents 4 bytes, there's 16, if you recall from the previous when we were going over the binary. 4 bytes have a potential for 16 possible combinations, 16 possible characters. So that's why it's a base 16 encoding system. So 0 through 9 and then A through F. There'll never be any more letters in hex.
All right, so We just talked about that now. Fred just mentioned A through F and then 0 to 9 can take care of all the characters we need to represent. And that gives us now something that's human understandable when we see this produced by the report. We'll see in a minute. So what the Ronell's process might be in step 1, if you're looking to determine Jose's culpability, would be to first convert the ASCII values of X, Y, and Z into their binary equivalent, which would be this. So we've kind of reproduced this for you. So she's going to take the ASCII values and convert them into binary. This is what it's going to look like. So she's got the decimal value now, the binary for the ASCII equivalent. Step 2 is convert the binary values now into their hex equivalent. Pretty easy, she'll convert that. And again, Ronell is going to be using tools that allow her to do this. She doesn't necessarily have to do this all in her head or longhand on paper. There are tools that allow her to do this. But the process is, or the concern is that she knows how the process works. So if anyone were to question her, she can go back and rebuild this process and tell the investigator or tell the attorney or tell whomever, this is how I attained the answer, because I know how to convert from binary to decimal to hex in either direction.
And you can imagine how this could get complicated when you're dealing with photographs now, not just in 3 simple characters, right? So now you got a color representation for every micropixel on a screen, and you got a full photograph. You would never be able to do it by pen and paper.
Right, it would never work. So what Ronell is going to do now is going to look throughout Jose's hard drive for this character string, 58, 59, 5 alpha or 5A, to be able to determine if there's any existence of the XYZ character string, which might be from communications or maybe documents or whatever that he may have exchanged. So here's the summary of Ronell's step 2 process. She now knows the hex equivalents. Step 3, she's going to use a hex editor. Here's another tool that allows her to more easily review what's on Jose's hard drive and actually map each individual location down to almost the bit level to be able to determine if I can find this on Jose's hard drive.
And the purpose for converting to hex as well.
The question, sure. Can't see out there. Okay, the question was, how do you know when a byte starts?
Well, that'll be determined by the operating system, right? So the operating system, there's a file system structure, and when the computer boots up, it looks at the first sector, and everything's identified within. It's kind of hard to explain. You can definitely look in the book; it'll tell you how. But there's certain, the computer's told what sector what offset to go to start booting up, and where to pull its information, where to pull its operating system, where to look for certain things. So it just knows.
We'll show you in a minute what that first sector looks like. Yeah, the computer's pretty smart. It will know the OS, the operating system, as Fred said, will have all that coded. It will tell you where that first sector of that drive starts, and then that will be displayed in that hex editor.
But physically on the disk, it doesn't. There's no real first sector on the disk. When files are written to disk, they're written all over the place. So a file may be scattered throughout. So the operating system, you've heard of defragmenting a hard drive. Well, what it does is a computer will have to reassemble that file and then present it to you. So you just can't pull a file physically off a hard drive with its zeros and ones. They're scattered around the hard drive.
We're going to give you an example in a minute of that hex editor, all right, so which will help, as it says here, Ronell, to actually view that data. All right. Hexadecimal is used, and the hex editors are used because it's much easier for most humans to understand hex than it is binary. And so we kind of elevated from bits now, looking at things at ones and zeros, pulses on and off, to binary, now up to hex, which is much, well, for most humans anyway, to understand. All right, so using the hex editor, Ronell will be able to actually view the data then on the drive. What else can she view? Remnants of old files, even files that have been deleted are still on the drive. As we know, just because you delete something, it doesn't wipe it off the drive. It's just marked as being a sector or section that can't be read or written to, but we can still extract the data from it. Here's an example of what a hex editor would look like. And for the woman that asked the question, up in the upper left-hand corner begins the offsets. and the system will be able, the OS will tell you where that offset begins and exactly where to start looking in this register for the start of that particular device. And so you would look at the offsets in the upper left-hand corner. And as you look and you read across, I will break this out for you in a minute. This is the full view of what the hex editor would look like, and this is displayed by the software tool. We have 4 distinct panel areas, all right, 4 areas there, and this is what those areas look like. The header area, the actual major section C, which is the hex data panel, the character set on the far right-hand side gives you the ASCII character representation of what the numbers, the hex data in the middle, those hex values like OA, 43, 6F, well, these are the actual representations of those characters. If you have the ellipses there, means there's no representation, no character there, and it's typically zeros. So the header panel displays, again, the headers of the 3 panels, so it gives you the offset, it gives you the hex, and it gives you the character. All right. The C panel, the data panel, uses the byte offset number to identify the beginning of the header. So I use the offset to tell me where the header of that particular file is going to start. Every file is assigned a specific number. It's an address starting at 0 for the first byte. The first byte of the file, 1 for the second byte, and so on. The address panel, as it says, displays the address of the byte beginning at the beginning of the file. So I now know where I want to look for that file based on the address that I pull from the hex editor. All right, so the hex panel displays that value as a 2-byte character field. You saw that OA or AO, 6F, 5D. Those are the hex representation of the data that's on that particular drive in that particular field. And once again, this would be another kind of display of what that hex editor, if in essence what that hex editor is showing you is the data that are on a particular drive. This is what the data looks like. If you were to stop your hard drive from spinning and you could rip open the cover of your laptop and actually look at the data as it sits on your drive, this is what it would look like to the computer. Yeah, you got real good eyes. Exactly. All right. So I think that I'll bring that up in a minute. But you're right. If you go back here, where do you see that? What row and column? We'll highlight in a minute. But you have it. What 5.8, 5.9, 5 alpha is about 7 or 8 rows down, about 4 rows across, and that's exactly what Ronell would be looking for. All right. Very good. Excellent. All right, so the D panel, if you will, displays the ASCII values. So here's what Ronell would be looking for, and you can see there's a XYZ is represented there. She'd look for that as well. This is the easy way of doing it. It's not the cheating way, but here's the ASCII value. If you got thousands and thousands of bytes to look for. So we're going to look for that 58, 59A, and exactly right, as the gentleman pointed out, that in that hex editor, those would be the 2 locations that she's going to look for. And she'd be able to go to that specific location on that drive, given that offset of where to start at the beginning of the drive and how many bits into that drive do I need to go to actually find the XYZ value, extract that out, and start the beginning of gathering the evidence. Because now I found this on your drive, I have to be able to determine what are you doing with that? What other information is there that might corroborate our concerns that Jose is exchanging confidential information with a client? So, again, the hex editor is one of the tools that an investigator is going to use. A real quick overview of the process. So we get started. Both Fred and I are IT people, so sometimes pictures are better than words, and diagrams kind of get the idea across. So what we put together is just a quick little flow chart of what the forensics process would really look like, other than if you're doing it in Hollywood. You get an initial request. That's got to come from management. It might come from law enforcement. It might come from an attorney. It might come from, a business administrator. So someone in an organization. Is there validity in the request, first of all? If it's a business and you get a request, you have to kind of make sure that it's not one employee who's just really upset with another employee and trying to get that person in trouble, or possibly just trying to cause a scene. What's the legitimacy in the request? If there's no legitimacy in the request, if it's not valid, the investigation might stop. And that's not up to the investigator to determine, that's up to management to determine whether they want to go further. And again, if there's validity, is there a chain of custody? If that COD is chain of custody, is it immediate? In other words, do we have to secure the evidence immediately on scene? One of the, I guess, base truisms of forensics is the preservation of evidence and that chain of custody. And a chain of custody basically meaning that the investigator has had control over the evidence from the beginning, the start of the investigation, through the entire evaluation process until those evidence, those data were returned to the owner, if indeed legally they can be returned to the owner. So if there's a chain of custody, if it's immediate, you might go into the evidence handling process. When we ask, and maybe Fred can give us the answer, but where would there be immediacy, a need to do the investigation right on site and in the field? What do you think? Anyone have an idea what might cause immediacy of chain of custody? All right, well, possibly terrorist plot. We want to get the data. The information might be useful immediately. There's clock is ticking, so to speak. Kidnapping. All right, certainly I want to get the information. I might not be able to take the drive or the laptop back to an office or back to a lab and do it in a hermetically sealed environment.
Yeah, I think any criminal activity certainly would have a sense of urgency. In a corporate environment, if there was a malware or possibility of data being compromised, I think that would instill a sense of urgency as well.
And it might also where you have the device and maybe the device is failing. In a sense, you see the power has only got maybe 1% power left, and if the power fails, then that adds another layer of complexity to the investigation. So depending on who's on site, who's doing the investigation, the immediacy will be determined. If there is no immediacy and there's a good chain of custody, then we're going to establish the scope. And it's a search criteria. What is it we're actually looking for? In our case here, we're looking for the occurrence of Jose communicating with a potential competitor, so that XYZ, but it could be anything. You could be looking for a product code. Maybe you're looking for a particular file signature for a drawing or a schematic or some audio. It just depends on what the investigation is centered around. All right, the chain of custody, as I said, the critical part, how do I preserve the evidence, and what evidence do I have, what assurances do I have that the evidence can't be tampered with? Because as Fred mentioned earlier, a good attorney would certainly look at this as potentially questionable as far as the legitimacy of the findings. If I could show that the evidence wasn't handled properly, or wasn't protected properly, wasn't safeguarded, or was left unattended, or I can't track where it was between the point it was brought into a lab and the point it was actually investigated and actually reviewed. So think about, and this is probably one of the more truisms, if you watch the Hollywood version, they're always taking photographs, they're always working in somewhat hermetically sealed environments, although I find it very interesting how frequently the characters come in and out of the lab and don't bother taking really good precautions, but still protecting the evidence of the integrity of the evidence.
The chain of custody encompasses a lot, but at its kind of rudimentary level, or basic level, it's basically a sheet that whenever that data is moved from one person's hands to another, it's signed. So I sign it, here's the data, and then he signs that he received it, and then that piece of paper remains with the evidence. So later on, when the case may go to court or wherever else, it can be tracked of who has touched this evidence, right? Who's touched it, and we can track who's touched it, and if there's anything that may have been changed or altered on the evidence, then we can track who possibly may have done that.
Ultimately, you want to prove that unequivocally no one had an opportunity to manipulate the data, that the evidence presented by the examiner is exactly what the examiner captured and identified from the suspect's drive.
That's right.
Acquisition is, okay, now we have to go out and actually acquire the data. So how do we do that? Using the tools that we talked about, the hex editor, being able to go in and actually find the data that might reside on the actual drive. We throw up a term up there we're calling hashing. We're going to give you a quick example about that, but a hash is a way of uniquely identifying and making sure to the 100th degree, to the nth degree, that the two versions, the original drive that you took from the suspect and the drive that was analyzed by the investigator were 100% identical, bit for bit identical, so there's no question that the evidence found did indeed come from the suspect's drive. You prepare the actual data for presentation, and then you actually do the investigation, identify relevant data. I could put together a keyword list. I interview the suspect, I interview colleagues, employees. What am I looking for? Develop my search terms. Again, using a software tool to search the drive for those terms. And then I basically take those data and present them to management, law enforcement, whomever, as evidence of whatever they're looking for, and I communicate those findings. At that point, I'm either going to await a court date, go to court, testify on how I did the investigation and what evidence I found, where I found it, how I found it, close the case file once the case is adjudicated, and again, I guess adjudicated would be the best word. When there's no more case, you close the case file, you're done. Or you go back and do more investigation depending on the needs of whoever's running the field operations. So really quickly, we just summarize it like this. The objective is establish the scope. Again, here's the actions. I'm going to go quickly here because this is the process, and it's pretty straightforward how we get through the information. Licard's exchange principle, this is probably one of the few truisms if you're really a CSI diehard fan, going back to the old original, I think Vegas series, Licard's exchange principle. Everyone at a crime scene is either going to bring something in or bring something out, or take something away or bring something to the scene. So the idea is of being able to eliminate that cross-transference. You don't want anyone to be able to accidentally or intentionally manipulate the evidence. Now, again, this kind of applies to blood splatter or ballistics. It certainly applies in forensics from a cyber perspective, because you don't want anybody tainting the data. You don't want anyone causing any doubt about the integrity or value of the data and the evidence determined from those data. When we talk about chain of custody, you should answer these type of questions very quickly. Who collected, how was it collected, where was it collected, how was it preserved, etc. So again, being able to show unequivocally that the data are intact and are accurate. The acquisition we kind of talked about, moving a little quicker. Making a forensic image is essential. You never, ever, will never, ever, never work with the original. You will acquire the original, and you will make forensically sound copies. And a forensically sound copy is a one-for-one, bit-by-bit copy of the original. And once you can validate that you've made that copy, you put the original away, you seal it up, and it's never touched again. You make copies of the copy, and you only work on the copies. Each copy has to be forensically proven to be sound, to be, again, a bit-by-bit image of its predecessor. And you do that by taking a hash, right? And a hash value is just a number that's computed from a base number, all right? And it's really a summary of the original value, a little bit smaller, but it is extremely unlikely that there could ever be a different hash value. If the original and the image drive are identical bit by bit, and you've hashed the original and you hash the image drive, those two hashes should be the same. Or if not, then someone has manipulated the data. So you want to be able to hash, again, as it says here, is a digital fingerprint. And I have a little example of creating that one-for-one image. So here's what it would look like. All right, if you take, and I use the water bottle. I mean, it's a little bit more, I guess, intuitive than a disc, I guess. But if you took the original disk, all right, the suspect's original drive on the left, you're going to create a hash value. And the hash value is nothing more than a mathematical summarization of the value on the drive. Now, what the investigator is going to do is going to do a second hash. He's going to copy this. He's going to create a second hash of that copied drive. And he's going to hash the original drive. He's going to take that hash now of the target drive, the drive I'm going to be working from. If those two drives are equal, all right, now then what I'll end up having is a forensically sound, one-for-one, bit-by-bit image of my original drive. The original drive goes away. It's put away, locked up, put in an evidence bag, sealed, never touched again. And now I'm only going to work with this particular drive. I will make copies of this each time doing the hashing process because, if I only have one copy and something happens, you know? And basically, what, you make, how many drives would you potentially make in an average investigation, you think?
A couple, depends.
Yeah,
Depends
probably
on the
3 to
investigation.
4 drives, depending on what. In fact, it's going to depend on who gets a copy of the drive. Prosecution might get a copy, defense attorney might get a copy, defense department might get a copy. Depending on the nature of the investigation, you may have to make multiple copies to give out, and then you're going to have several copies for your own internal analysis that you want to work with.
Yeah, and if you look at the hash value that's assembled there, there's different types of hash algorithms, but that's one. If you boot up the computer and then quickly turn it off, that hash value will be completely different. It doesn't change by one number. It's a whole, the algorithm's reapplied and it's a completely different number just by rebooting the computer. So you don't even need to change a document. You know, just opening a document, again, will completely change the hash value.
So that's why the hash value is extremely important in an investigation, because I want to be able to prove that no one changed the data from the original subject's drive to the drive I worked on now for my imaging and for my investigation. So it establishes the authenticity of the drive, and then both the original and the copy drive are one and the same. Mobile phones, real quickly, I can put it here just because most of us are using a mobile phone. What's out there and what we can get off a mobile phone, I think it's good to move just quickly here. What are some of the potential evidences that we can extract off your mobile phone? So be very, very careful, all right? The date, time, language, you have phone book information, it says audio, video recordings, multimedia messages. If you use the phone, it's stored there, and it can be extracted. So again, it's a very useful device in today's society, but it's also a very lethal device in the sense that it contains an awful lot of information that certainly can be used in an investigation. And simply deleting, doesn't make it, the information is still there. So unless you take that mobile device and you take that card and you turn it back into silicon and take a trip around the world, spreading 1/7 of it against along the beaches in every continent, maybe it's secure. But other than that, the information is still there. Here's what you can get off an Android phone, just as an example. If you have an Android operating system, here's some of the data that can be extracted. Sir?
Is that a physical extraction? Is there a tool that you use software-wise for the extraction on the data, or is that taking out something from itself?
Now, the question was, is it a tool or software, or do you have to physically disassemble the phone? No, you can actually take the phone, connect it to a tool, and it can then access this information. In fact, British law enforcement are using this tool now. They can stop you. It's a British law, but they can take the phone, and they have a mobile device that they can actually connect it at the traffic stop or law enforcement stop, and they can suck everything off your phone at that point. So it doesn't have to disassemble the phone. Fortunately, I guess you could say fortunately, you have to be in law enforcement to buy that type of tool. You just can't go to like Best Buy and get it. So there's a little bit of protection for everybody out there. Again, this is a nice little chart we put together to say, like, well, from a perspective of who, what, when, where, and why, what you can get. So, for example, I can get your messages. I can get who you sent it to, what the message was about, where, when. I can get all that information about messages sent on your phone. Images, certainly, images and video. Probably the only thing is not why did you possibly send that? What were you possibly thinking about when you sent that image? That probably can't get extracted, but I can get everything else out of the phone. All right, so we did the data preparation. Preparing the evidence is basically, how do I put the evidence together in the format that law enforcement wants it or that management wants it? That's pretty straightforward. What we have here is a device that's called a hardware interrupt device that we put between the target's machine and the subject's machine and the target. The idea, as Fred just mentioned, even if you turn the machine on, it changes the data. Well, we don't want anything to destroy the original data, so even before we make those images, we put this interrupt device between the original data and our target, where we're going to copy it to. So when we turn the machine on, should there be any errant or rogue piece of software that might try to destroy the drive, it will never be able to read back to the drive itself.
Yeah, kind of similar to cassette tape, if you remember those, if any of you were around back then. You could break that little top thing and you wouldn't be able to record to it anymore. So it's a write blocker. It'll prevent anything from writing to that hard drive.
All right, we determine a keyword list. Again, I'm moving a little quickly here. I want to show you some examples where data lurk. Here's where we actually find data. So this kind of gets into the nitty-gritty. Now we know how data are designed from bits and bytes all the way up, how we find it looking at using a hex editor. Where would we actually look for data? We look for data in 4 places. There are a lot of places, but primarily we look for it in a place called RAM slack, disk slack, file slack, and swap files. And this would be the go-to point for a forensic investigator. You know, for the first, these are the low-hanging fruit type stuff. Look here first because it usually consists and contains lots of potential data. All right, slack space. Real quickly, from a math perspective, the data here aren't user-defined. This is what the computer has complete control of. So as a user, you can't determine whether you're going to use this data, delete these data, or whatnot. But this is anything that went on that's related to what goes on behind the scenes in the computer could be what's the right word I'm looking for? Could be liable to be captured by the computer and thrown into these slack spaces. To understand how this works very quickly, the operating system, again, depending on your operating system, basically says, hey, we have to work with something called a cluster, all right? And a cluster has to be full. We don't allow operations to take place with half-full clusters. So I, as the operating system, have to do whatever I can to make sure whatever we're processing data, we're going to work with full clusters. And here's how it determines the size of a cluster, all right? The size is 4,096 bytes or 8 sectors. Now, this is why this was important several slides ago, why bytes are important and bits and bytes are important in forensics. Here's an example, all right? One cluster contains these 8 sectors, all right? So it's a whole cluster of 4,096 bytes. Here's a memo, all right? Here's a letter to mom, all right? This is going to get stored on the drive. Well, this particular letter, in my example at least, what we used, is 1,040 bytes long. All right, so for this whole, if you look back in the Word document with the graphics on it, it totals up to 1,040 bytes. And that turns out to be, if you do the math at 512 bytes per sector, it's only going to take up 2.03125 sectors on a drive. So it takes up a very, very small amount of space on the drive. In that case, then it takes up what? It takes up a fraction of the remaining sector, 2 bytes of the first sector and about 16 bytes of a third sector. So it looks like this. All right, if you were to physically look at it, here's what that memo to mom, if it were to be stored in memory, would look like. All right, the memo takes up everything that's in that orange or red, and that's all. But I have to fill out that entire sector, all 8 sectors, that entire cluster. So the computer takes over. And the computer takes over and force feeds or forces into that remaining sector 2 that's not full, all right, something called RAM slack. It goes out and grabs, all right, anything it can find in computer memory, anything running around in memory, as long as it's 496 byte long, and sticks it in the RAM slack. Now it fills up that sector. It's full. I have all these sectors 4 through 8 that are still open or still unfilled. The operating system doesn't like that because it's not a full cluster yet. So what it does, it goes out and again takes information from memory, and it pads those clusters, or sectors, excuse me. So it's going to go by and grab any data it can and fills up the remaining sector 4 through 8. Now I've got a full cluster I can process. Well, what's the from a forensics perspective, now you look at it, this is what it looks like on the drive, right? Computer's happy, operating system's happy, I've got full sectors and I got full clusters. All right. If I take RAM slack and disk slack and I add those together, I get something called file slack. A very good place for an investigator to look for. Because why? And we put it down in red there. Right? It says anything that's potentially contained in memory, randomly grabbed from the computer, could be in here from a previous session, since the time you turned the computer on. There could be a lot of information stored in there that would be useful to an investigator. Fragments of prior email messages, word processing documents. That's where I might find that XYZ for Ronell talking to Jose. All right, let's see how this works very quickly, all right? So I'm going to send the original memo to mom. It's going to be saved to disk. Save command is issued. Operating system locates an area in disk where I want to save it, and then overlays that area. So basically I say save, and that's what happens. I take that original memo to mom, and I write it to memory, and that's what it looks like in memory. All right, so I got free space. I'm going to go in and I'm going to fill those sectors. I want to delete that. All right, so I issue the delete command, do the same thing. It goes in and deletes it, and the file's gone. But what? Is the file really gone? That file is still there in memory and still sitting there in those first 2.5 or 2.3 type sectors. The information is still potentially there. And I have a variety of other information that I could potentially look at. All right, so again, just because it's deleted, it's not necessarily removed from the drive.
Just for, this may be a little too in-depth here, but where it's deleted actually is in the directory entry. So each operating system has a file structure that tells the system how files are stored. And when a file is deleted, it just basically takes that directory entry and throws it away. So it's similar to if you're in a library, taking the card catalog and throwing the card catalog away, saying, okay, now the book's been disposed of, right? But the book's still on the shelf.
So although the memo to mom has been deleted, it still remains on disk. Now, here's an example. We have a new memo. All right, now this memo is only 512 bytes long, and it's going to be saved. So I issue the save command. OS takes over, looks for a space to store it, and it's going to go and store that memo right there. But the problem is, right, a total of 528 bytes from the old memo is still on the disk. So I can still go in and look at remnants or fragments of that original memo and extract those, even though they've been overwritten by another potentially shorter memo. So, you know, if you delete something or even if you overwrite it, unless you're overwriting it and it's exactly the same length, bit for bit, there's going to be remnants left over that are going to be extractable by the forensic investigator, and that's where we find potential evidence.
In fact, on that deleted slide, a forensic investigator won't call that deleted, they'll call that unallocated. And I don't know if you've ever heard that allocated and unallocated. Well, when that file is deleted, it's actually in unallocated space. Once a file is resaved, now it's in allocated space, and as Al said, it becomes slack if it's in that area that's not the file that's being saved there.
And then that slack area is readable by the forensics tools that a forensic investigator would use, and then can find those remnants of conversations, emails, websites you may have visited, etc. So any potential viable data that may have been scooped up by the operating system in RAM slack is potentially evidence that the person doesn't have any control over. You don't have any control over what the OS, the operating system, takes. Swap file, basically, as your random access memory fills up, right, it's got to save itself. So it uses a swap file to swap memory, and that swap file can be huge, right? As I say, it'll be several hundred thousand bytes, depending on your operating system, and that swap file can contain potentially entire documents, lots of information, again, that might be useful for the investigation. So I'll run a keyword search against the swap file to see if any of those keywords, based on my investigation scope, might come up in the swap file. Two types of swap files, and we're kind of ended up here pretty quickly. A dynamic swap. So if you shut down your computer system normally, all right, without any kind of problem, this gets cleared out and disappears. If you pull the plug, all right, rather than going through a normal shutdown, if you pull the plug, dynamic swap is going to be saved. So from an investigative perspective, if the machine is running and I walk into the person's office, I've got to make some decisions. If I shut it off, what's going to happen to the swap file? Or if I simply pull the plug? Well, there's positives, pluses, and minuses on each side of that decision-making process. Static swap contains data that were present when the system was running and then when it was shut down. So as the system's up and running, I shut it down normally, then I can go in and look at static swap and get an idea of what was in the system while it was running and then when it shut down. So I preserve some of that memory. All right, pros and cons. Again, if you have to make this decision and an investigator is faced with this decision, if I pull the plug, I keep the swap files intact. I isolate the machine potentially for some unauthorized access. I can hermetically seal it, put drive protectors in there, make sure no one can turn it on, take out the power supply, etc. And I protect that unallocated space. On the negative side, if I don't pull the plug, if I pull it, then try to put it back in and start it up. System might not start up again. It might have power problems. You know, we're smart enough, and I suspect many of you out there as well, you know, if someone doesn't shut my machine down correctly or turns it on incorrectly without hitting the F9, the plus key, and the bracket key, the right bracket key in sequence, I automatically start a software program that does a self-destruct, overwrites my hard drive, and all of a sudden you start destroying data, potentially destroying evidence, corrupting that evidence. So there's some you know, pros and cons, if you will, from an investigator's perspective. So, quick tour. We've only had just about an hour, and maybe we've gone over about 10 minutes. How data start from the primal bits and bytes, building them all up to hex, how an investigator uses a hex tool to actually look and peer into the hard drive, to actually look for specific hex representation of binary values, a little bit about a hashing routine and the importance of never using an original drive, always hashing it to ensure a one-for-one, bit-for-bit image, always working with the duplicate drive. And then this last couple of slides where we talked about where data may lurk, file slack, drive slack, RAM slack. The data are out there. The end user has no control over what gets pushed into those empty sectors. The OS, I have to work with full clusters. The OS operating system does that automatically by scooping up those random pieces of information that you may have thought of you've deleted or maybe sitting there since you turned the machine on yesterday, if you didn't turn it off when you went home at night, that entire session. Those data are there and are accessible for the investigator. Kind of ending up real quickly, no single piece of evidence is going to necessarily make or break a case. So even with a forensic investigator, and what we briefly talked about tonight, this is not the only evidence that management, law enforcement, whomever is going to go with and ultimately bring a case to court. Forensic investigators are going to provide a unique view of that potential suspect, what he or she may have been involved in, whether it's from a phone records or an iPad or a desktop device, anything that can store data. Your multifunctional device in your office, we used to call photocopy machines, can be investigated forensically for what's on those drives. So again, no one single piece of evidence is going to make or break a case. I guess with that, oops, I don't know, we went to dark. So maybe the batteries went. At that point, that was the end. I don't know. Okay. Well, that was the end of the presentation. We had just about an hour. We're about 5 minutes over, so we'll kind of open it up to questions and hopefully answers. Any particular questions or general questions? Sir?
There's a lot of overriding programs. Absolutely, absolutely. As soon as there's a forensic way to find information, there's a counter tool to clean it, to clear it.
And what we would look for then would be the use of that tool. And why did the employee use the tool? Was that a standard operating procedure? Where did the tool come from? Who authorized it? When was it used? And that could also just add to the case. And why did you destroy the data? Why did you try to electronically shred the information?
Because they have to remove the tool, but the evidence of the tool is still there because you're doing a forensic. So you always run into the same problem, right?
And so you can tell by date, time, and actual manufacturer brand what tool was actually attached to the machine. So again, you can. Yes, sir. That's the two best ways to defeat forensic investigation. The first one is use encryption, because I'm not going to waste my time. If I know the person has used encryption, I'm not going to wait. There's going to be some other, as at my last slide, we're saying there's more evidence. We'll find evidence somewhere else. It may not be on that particular machine. It might be on some machine they have at home, a device, a mobile device. But encryption is not going to, it won't justify the investigation, because especially if the person has used an AES, a real strong 128-bit encryption key, you can spend a lifetime.
And you have to remember, law enforcement's the type of organization that's going to be dealing with that. There's forensics on a lot of different levels, right? There's a small mom and pop shops. There's corporate forensics, right? Now in a corporation, drives are encrypted. It doesn't matter if it's on or off because you have all the keys in-house, so you're able to decrypt it and image it. Now, law enforcement can certainly, if the computer's on and they suspect that there's encryption, then there's certain devices that are mobile power units that they can plug into and carry the computer out and keep it on. But yeah, I mean, Al's absolutely right. If it's encrypted, it's almost as good as wiping it. Essentially, it is wiped in a way. Everything's overwritten by the encryption.
Just to give you a perspective, I've worked with one organization that can go down, can retrieve data to the 17th level substrate if you erase it. And another organization that can do one better, they go down to the gate architecture level. They'll look at the gate architecture and see if the switch is open or closed and rebuild the switches open and closed back up the binary and go up from a switch architecture level if they really want to get your data. The second way to defeat encryption, just one quick second. The second way is to touch as much potential technology as you can, because ultimately it comes down to a cost decision. And if you've touched servers and you've touched hundreds of different technology devices, and all those have to be investigated, each investigation of each device is going to cost something, both time and money. And if it becomes cost prohibitive, then you'll find we'll still get the data, but we may be doing it a completely different way. We may not be doing that first level investigation. Sir?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's good.
Wait, repeat the question so everyone can hear, sorry. Just a little bit louder, sorry. Not me.
Hello? Yeah.
It's encrypted.
Good question. You couldn't recover it. You could, if you were, a way that maybe it could be recovered was if you were a Russian spy and Russia wanted to throw millions and millions of dollars of reconstructing each bit and seeing if it was turned on or off in a prior state. But if it overwrites 3, 4, 5 times, it gets impossible. They say theoretically they can recover stuff that's been overwritten 7 times, but you'd have to be like a Russian spy, and it'd have to be a nation that was trying to find your information. It'd have to be a pretty big thing.
And that's the thing too, is that if someone uses a data destruction tool or a wiping tool, then that may be one indication that the person's involved in some unauthorized activity. Because if it's not a normal business practice to have this tool installed on the software while it was on the system, where did it come from? Why was it used? When was it used? Against what files was it used? So that kind of might build a stronger case that that suspect was involved in doing something illegal because they may be trying to hide it. But once again, just to restate that, unfortunately, like television, it's not like, that's not the case. No one single piece of evidence solves the case. There's going to be multiple pieces of evidence gathered about this particular suspect. The computer is only one aspect. And the person is, there might be CCTV, there's certainly countless interviews that are going to be conducted with potential witnesses, colleagues, employees, employers, whatever. So building a case is not going to involve around what might be found simply on a machine. Because you got to figure, anyone who's accused of potential crime potentially is going to have someone working in defense and trying to refute everything that the investigator has found and trying to undermine the investigative process, the integrity of the data, the chain of custody, the integrity of the investigative lab. Was it a clean lab? Could someone else obtain the data? So all those have to take into consideration. If someone's going to shred something, if they want to try, they can certainly do it. And there'll be other areas that might eventually lead to their apprehension. good question, sir.
Did you give the Android example because Apple is a great deal different?
No, I have an Android, so I wanted to find out what I could do with an Android, so this is my Android. But Apple is just as suspect to being investigated, or at least from a forensics perspective. It all stores, basically, Android, Apple, whatever device you have, it still comes down to bits and bytes. They still store data the same way. And maybe a different process, a different type of tool, but they're both investigatable.
And a lot of that evidence is out on the internet as well, right? Because we use our phones for what, right? To contact, to go outside. You know, there's some information on the phone, but if you think about it, it's Facebook or emails or somewhere else. So if you use Yahoo for your email's on a Yahoo server. If you're using Google Maps, that information, everything's stored. So everything's on the internet, Facebook. So there's other ways of getting that information as well. It changes the scale. I mean, forensics has changed drastically because of that.
And you look at, I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
Does the drag something on hard drive and then goes to the data trail?
It can a little bit. Yeah, it can a little bit because you're restructuring. So if you delete everything and then defrag, it can obscure some of the information. Absolutely.
Now, if you have
Not all of it.
defragging every week, then that might be somewhat, call attention
Yeah.
to yourself.
You couldn't guarantee that everything's deleted, but it would obscure the information. Absolutely, because it'd be overriding.
Gentleman in the back?
Yeah, you were talking about how everything's stored on the internet. Well, have you had any cases that you had to work where the data was not necessarily just on a server, but it was stored on like in a data center, like a shared hosting environment where multiple people were using the same physical structure, local, I guess, clients of that.
Yes. So cases where that's arise would be typically with like email servers and things like that, but usually it was in a corporate environment, not in a public setting like on a Yahoo server or an eBay server, whatever. So it'd be in a corporate environment. It'd be a shared file server or an email server, and there's slight differences with that as well. So with an email server, you typically wouldn't do a bit-for-bit image as we discussed. Typically, you just grab. It's acceptable practice to grab that email file structure. So if it's notes, an NSF or whatever, and grab that file and then pull out the data relevant to that user. Just because you can't, obviously, just imaging an email server, you'd capture email. If there's 5,000 people in the organization, you capture 5,000 people's emails, which may not be pertinent to the case. So that also makes things tricky, though. Good question.
Hang on one minute, sir. Back, yes, sir. Ma'am.
If there's actual physical damage to the disk, say it's broken in pieces or been run through one of those physical computers, what kind of tools do you have to read those?
Well, we had one case where someone tried to destroy the drive by taking a hammer to it, and we were able to recover broken pieces of the drive, which we put to a plaster cast mold, and we're able then to read sectors off of the various chips, broken chips. But that's not a normal tool that
That's extreme, for sure.
But that's your. Let me put it this way: your tax dollars were well spent there, because that particular agency wanted to get the information off that particular.
Sure.
Drive. But if you put it through a shredder,
Yeah.
if you just overwrite the drive, certainly the information is there, as we kind of showed tonight. The best way to destroy data is simply to get an industrial shredder, take the disk drive, the actual platter, and run it through the shredder. Make it cost ineffective. Yeah, there's another question. Sir.
Yeah, it was more about the same things. What type of attempted physical destruction of memory have you seen, and what ones have been effective, and what ones have been surprisingly ineffective?
Surprisingly ineffective is you can't destroy a disk drive by putting it in a microwave. Microwave fails first, so you don't do it in a microwave. Best is actually shredding it. Electronic shredding, you could always get back to the data depending on how well it's done and to what depth. If you physically destroy it, you can never read it, you can get to it. That's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, and it all depends on the data that's contained within, right? So if you're a secret spy agent from Russia, you may want to go the shredding route. If you're just, Joe user like myself, and you're getting rid of your computer, then, a DBAN and a single wipe would be more than sufficient. No one's going to spend the resources to recover. They'd have to spend so much money to recover maybe a social security number of yours. It wouldn't happen. If you open your drive, there's not going to be many people that are going to try to retrieve the information. I mean, a hair is like Mount Everest on this drive, just a hair. So if you touch it with your finger, yeah. But yeah, finger smudge is huge. It's like a Mount Everest. Well, you spin. No, you're exactly right. You can't if you're booting up the computer, you're changing data, and you can't. But you can spin up the drive without booting up the computer and pull the data off. Yeah, and that's essentially what you do, right? So you hook up a write blocker to it that powers the drive, and then in the data port it blocks any data from being written. So it just spins the drive, and then it pulls the data off, and it counts. It runs an algorithm against all the zeros and ones, gets the hash, then copies the data bit for bit, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, copies everything. It doesn't even care about file structure or anything. Every single 0 and 1 on the drive, spits it back out, and then runs the same hash again on its data. So it's not doing it on the drive. You don't boot up the drive and do it on that computer. You're pulling the data off 0 and 1s by 0 and 1s, and then performing the hash on your system, on the forensic examiner system.
And also you're documenting this so that you can go to court and say, yes, I turned the machine on, but here's what I had, here's how I prevented the write in the block, here's how I extracted the data, and then here's the hash that they compare. Yes, sir.
So each hash is unique for each drive?
Each hash is unique for anything, regardless of what it is. So if it's a file. No.
No, not the unique hash. I mean, we didn't get into the detail here, but the algorithm used to create the hash, even if you reverse engineer that process, I mean, to say unequivocally no, that's not fair. I mean, if you had enough time, effort, energy, and money, and you wanted to try that, you might be able to do it. In fact, two Chinese researchers just 2 years ago had a paper where they looked at the MD5 hashes possibly being not as secure as people think they are. They did a proof of concept where they try to reverse engineer the hash and try to show where it's not necessarily secure, but no one's come up back to be able to perform that. Right now, hash is industry accepted as being the one way to be able to validate the authenticity of drive A against drive B.
And there's a lot of different hashes. Some of them are more accepted than others. Typically, a 256-bit hash is where you want to be. And we were talking about bits, so you can already see the potential values that you can have in a 256-bit hash. It's astronomical.
How has migration towards solid-state drives changed from spinning platters? How has that changed how you guys do your work?
We have a lot more billable hours.
Yeah.
It makes it much more interesting, a little bit more difficult.
Yes, solid state, not so much yet, even though it's around, because being in a corporate environment, we still have, hard disk. We still have the platters, spinning platters. It would vary from person, from the type of forensics you're doing. So if you're in the law enforcement, they'd probably deal with it more. But it's still the same. It's still copying bit for bit.
Still looking at the primary basis of
Yeah.
those ones and zeros. And what's another question? Yes, ma'am. Possibly, yes. Okay.
Oh, sure.
I can say possibly because I
tell you logged on.
What time you logged on, what you logged off, if you attached any additional external
Yep.
devices.
USB drives, hard drives, if you searched a web, you know, whatever you did, if you just logged on and didn't do anything, then all we'd see is you logged on. But if you logged on, and the more you do, the more, you know, the more trail you leave. Absolutely.
And then you can go in and try to change the date timestamp. That's locked as well.
That's
I
right.
think Rose has got our drawing. Any other questions? I don't think we've cut it off.
If you didn't get a note card and you want to come up here real quick and just fill it out, I'll drop it in the bag and I'll do the drawing.
You want to get your book?
Yeah, it's what's right here.
You need to have something signed by the,
Yep, you can come down and do that now. And we do have a few copies for sale as well, so if you don't win the raffle and you're interested in purchasing a copy, we'll be outside the auditorium.
Here's the other copy.
Thank you very much, everyone. Please
Thank you.
stand.